For years, Vince Gill stood quietly in shadows of one of the greatest rock bands in history. Fans saw the perfect harmonies, the flawless guitar solos, and the sold-out arenas. But behind that calm smile was a man carrying the weight of a legacy that was never truly his. Now at 67, he's finally ready to tell the truth. It's a truth about loss, about pressure, and about the pain of stepping into another man's place. A man the world still refuses to forget. The call that changed everything. When Vince Gill picked up the phone that afternoon in 2017, he had no idea his life was about to change. On the other end was Irving Azoff, the Eagles' longtime manager. His tone was calm, but carried a sense of urgency. Glenn Frey, one of the band's founders and the voice behind countless classics, had passed away the previous year on January 18, 2016 from rheumatoid arthritis, acute ulcerative colitis, and pneumonia. He was only 67. The Eagles were broken, uncertain whether to go on. But Henley had an idea, and that idea had Vince Gill's name on it. Gill was already a country superstar. With 22 Grammy Awards and a catalog of hits that defined the genre, he had nothing left to prove yet. When the offer came to join one of the most revered rock bands of all time, he froze. It felt like a dream, Helleter admitted, but also like stepping into someone's ghost. Glenn Frey wasn't just a bandmate to the Eagles. He was a cornerstone. Replacing him wasn't possible, and Vince knew it still. Don Henley insisted. He told Vince, "You're the only person we've heard about." It wasn't about filling a vacancy. It was about keeping the music alive. For Henley, Frey's songs weren't meant to die with him. And for Vince, that sense of duty outweighed his fate. Yet deep down he knew this would come at a cost. Fans were skeptical. Critics whispered. Some said it was disrespectful to continue without Glenn. Vince understood that I didn't want to give people one more reason not to be happy that I was there. He said in his first rehearsals, the weight of history pressed on him. Every note, every harmony, every pause carried the ghost of Frey's voice. Vince wasn't there to imitate. He was there to honor. Still, the line between the two was painfully thin. When the band took the stage again for the first time since Frey's death, the applause was deafening. But for Vince, it felt bittersweet. It wasn't triumph. It was survival. Inside the pressure cooker from the outside, everything looked perfect. The harmonies were tight, the guitars seamless, and the audience ecstatic to hear the Eagles again. But behind the curtain, Vince Gill was living through one of the most difficult transitions of his 50-year career. Joining a band like the Eagles wasn't just about learning the songs. It was about understanding a family that had already survived decades of egos, breakups, lawsuits, and grief. Vince was walking into a world with its own language, rules, and scars. Inside rehearsals, the mood could shift without warning. Don Henley, the band's de-actor leader, was meticulous. Every chord, every lyric, every breath had to be exact. Joe Walsh, the guitar wildcard, brought an unpredictable energy, balancing humor and chaos in equal measure. Timothy B. Schmidt remained the quiet mediator, the emotional glue that kept things from cracking. For Vince, the challenge wasn't musical. It was emotional. You walk in and you're the new guy in a band that's been together for half a century. He once reflected, "You don't just play notes, you have to earn trust." The band's chemistry was complex. Henley and Walsh had a history of clashing creatively, and Vince quickly learned that their perfection could easily turn into tension. When he suggested new arrangements for classics like Take It to the Limit or Peaceful Easy Feeling, the room sometimes went silent. He wasn't trying to change their sound. He just wanted to honor it with fresh spirit. But in a group so defined by legacy, even small suggestions could feel like sacrilege. And then there was their audience. Every show came with the pressure of expectation. Vince knew there were fans sitting in the crowd, arms crossed, judging him before he even sang a note. "I didn't want anyone thinking I was trying to replace Glenn," he said quietly in an interview. "You can't replace him. You just try to stand beside what he built night after night." As he sang phrase lines, he could feel the emotion in the air, the grief, the nostalgia, the bittersweet ache of a band continuing without its heart. For Vince, that stage became both a dream and a battlefield. Offstage, he'd retreat to his hotel room, sometimes sitting in silence after a show, wondering if he was doing the right thing. He had given up a solo career where every decision was his. The set list, the tone, the freedom. Now he was part of something larger, but also something haunted. The applause was thunderous, but the loneliness afterward was louder. When everything nearly fell apart, it happened on an ordinary afternoon during rehearsal, one of those long, exhausting days that blurred into each other after months on the road. The band was preparing for another leg of the tour, running through set lists that fans had memorized over decades. Vince had grown more confident by then, feeling that he had finally found his rhythm with the group. But that day would nearly undo it all. The tension started over something small, an arrangement. Vince suggested a new phrasing for one of the band's classics, hoping to bring a subtle emotional lift without altering its core. It wasn't rebellion, it was instinct. Yet, within minutes, the room's mood shifted. Don Henley, ever the perfectionist, didn't agree with the change. Joe Walsh chimed in with his own opinion, and suddenly, our song that had been played for 40 years turned into a battleground. Voices rose, instruments went silent. For the first time, Vince felt truly unwelcome. The air grew heavy, and as the argument spiraled, he could feel the old dynamic closing ranks. The shared history he wasn't part of. His suggestion had crossed an invisible line. He wasn't one off the originals. He was the outsider who'd stepped into a sacred space. I started to wonder if I even belonged, he would later confess when rehearsal finally broke. Vince didn't speak to anyone. He went straight to his hotel room, shut the door, and sat in the quiet. For the first time since joining the band, he thought seriously about leaving. He had sacrificed his solo career, the freedom to play his own songs, to call his own shots for this. And now, instead of fulfillment, all he felt was exhaustion. That it was one of those moments, he said, when I thought maybe this wasn't meant for me after all. But the story didn't end there. A few hours later, there was a knock at his door. It was Don Henley. For years, Henley had been the band's shadowest shell. Stein, guarded, impossible to read. Yet that night, he was different. He asked if they could talk privately. They sat together for nearly an hour away from the noise, the crew, and the weight of expectation. Don admitted that things had been tough, that the band was still grieving, still learning how to exist without Glenn. Then he said something that changed everything. You're not here to be Glenn, that you're here because we believe in you. Finding his voice among giants. After that talk with Don Henley, something subtle began to change. The tension that had once suffocated Vince started to loosen its grip. He was still the new guy, still the outsider, but no had carried something he hadn't before, permission to breathe. Don helped me see I didn't have to be known but myself. Vince would later say that was the beginning of feeling Atham. Slowly, his presence started to shape the band's rhythm in ways that no one expected. His voice, pure and emotional, blended seamlessly with the Eagles' legendary harmonies. Songs like Tequila Sunrise and Take It to the Limit took on a slightly different tone. Still timeless, but softer, more reflective. Fans began to notice it, too. There was something new in those familiar melodies, something that felt like healing. Henley and the others respected Vince's restraint. He wasn't trying to outshine them, and he never treated his role as a spotlight. Instead, he approached every song like a caretaker, polishing it carefully without disturbing its soul. During live shows, his guitar work, elegant, fluid, and precise, added a warmth that complemented Joe Walsh's more explosive style. On stage, he looked calm, but inside he was pouring every bit of his heart into each note. What made it even more remarkable was that Vince did all this while refusing to play a single one off his own hits. When Henley once suggested performing Whenever You Come Around during sound check, Vince politely declined. With all due respect, I'd rather not, he told him. He explained that fans had come to hear Eagles songs, not Vince Gill songs. I didn't want to give them one more reason not to be happy that I was there. He later said it was humility few in his position would have shown, but it was also his way of showing respect to Glenn Frey's legacy. The irony was that Whenever You Come Around, written decades earlier about Amy Grant, the woman who would later become his wife, was one of his most beloved songs, But Vince chose silence over self-promotion. "I came here to honor Glenn," he said simply, "not to sell myself." That choice spoke louder than any guitar solo ever could. Over time, that quiet integrity began to win people over. The fans who once doubted him started to cheer his name. The band began to treat him less like a guest and more like family. His role evolved from substitute to cornerstone, someone who carried both the band's past and its fragile future. By the time the Eagles announced the long goodbye tour in 2023, Vince was no longer a question mark in the lineup. He was part of the heartbeat, the weight of fugazi, and the cost of silence. Even after years of success with the Eagles, Vince Gill couldn't escape a quiet ache that followed him everywhere. The